This week we're going to talk about boondocking. Boondocking is about as close to actual camping as you're going to get when you're traveling around a 40-foot motorhome, which has pretty much all the comforts of an apartment. We have running water, we have heat, we have electricity. We have satellite TV if we're out in the boondocks. That works most places unless you're in Alaska. So what we want to talk about this week is boondocking and what it is, and give you just a few pictures and a few examples of some places we were in Arizona. Boondocking is camping out someplace where there is not a regular campground. You'll be out in the wilderness generally. There is a great deal of federal land, particularly in the western half of the U.S., which is available for camping. There are restrictions in some places, so you do have to check it out, and a number of websites you can go to figure those kind of things out. In general, the rules are that you camp where someone else has camped. They don't want you breaking new ground, and there's lots of places as you drive around and even hike in if that's what your preference is. The rule is to find some place where someone else has already disturbed the ground and had a campsite there previously, and that's generally very easy to do. One of the things we found, and we'll show you in some video later on, is don't arrive at those kind of sites after dark. We did that going into Ajo, Arizona, and never thought about it, but it was later in the day and the sun was going down as we got there. And once you're back in the wilderness, there is no light. You pretty much have the lights of your vehicle. And so we found we had to actually get out with a flashlight and walk around to look at potential sites. Would have been much easier if we got in there in daylight. So I encourage you to keep that in mind if you're going to go out and camp somewhere. And I just got a friend up on the sofa with me. My dog just jumped up if you saw her in the video screen. We're going to talk about where we went. We're going to start at the KOFA Canyon, which is south of Quartzsite. We'd been in Quartzsite in January for the RV show, and that's an interesting experience. If you haven't been to that one, you should try and go sometime. Quartzsite is in the western part, kind of south of central in Arizona, not too far from the California border. And from there we headed down to Ajo and on down to Organ Pipe National Monument. So we'll talk about that in the video as we go along. The first place we camped was in the KOFA Canyon, south of Quartzsite, and it's a very, very nice spot to be. There's a lot of space back in there, a lot of places to go hike. There's several trails you can use. You can go back into the old mine place and see a lot of the history of Arizona in that part of the world. So enjoy our pictures as we take you around KOFA Canyon. heading south towards the Mexican border, and you come to the very small town of Ajo. There's not a great deal there, but south of that town there are a number of roads that go back into the wilderness, and it's all federal land which is available for boondocking. So we arrived, as I said earlier, we arrived after dark, which was not a particularly good idea, but we did eventually find a spot with the idea if we didn't like this spot, we could always move around in the daylight. But after we got there and looked around a bit, we decided it was a great place to stay. So we had a good time hiking in the desert, exploring some of the territory around there. Drove back down a back road in the Jeep and found a cemetery which was back in the middle of nowhere, still an active cemetery apparently for the town of Ajo. There was some fairly recent activity burying someone in that graveyard. Very, very pretty little, very picturesque site out in the desert, but several miles out of town. The one interesting thing when we were in this particular campsite after we'd been down to the Organ Pipe National Monument for a day was that I was out in the evening and there were two lights more or less hovering in the sky. They were close enough, I was pretty sure they weren't helicopters because I didn't hear any noise of an airplane in the sky at all, but these lights stayed there for quite some period of time and were slowly drifting to the ground. So my assumption was this was Border Patrol that was out on some kind of an activity after dark looking for whoever might be crossing through that part of the desert. So one of the things to be cautious of if you're in that part of the world is there are a lot of things that go on in the desert at night that you don't want to be part of. We never felt particularly threatened where we were. It was not that far from civilization. We did see several Border Patrol vehicles go through at various times, and so it was an area that was actively patrolled, but it's one of the facts of life. You're in the southern part of the U.S. these days. From Ajo, we decided not to move the RV down to the Organ Pipe area. It's something we wanted to see. It's a unique part of the Sonoran Desert that spreads across into Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And these are a unique type of cactus not found particularly farther north of that. And it's not quite an endangered species on the list, but it is a kind of a rarity to see in the U.S. So we drove down there and took a jeep trail back up into the mountains and had a chance to see some sights and see some of the scenery. So we'll show you some pictures from that part of the trip. never thought about boondocking, I would encourage you to at least go and try it and experience it. It's obviously a relatively inexpensive way to do camping because there are no campground fees. Of course, there are generally no services, so you have to pack everything in, and you want to pack everything back out, leaving nothing behind in the spots you were in. Make sure you take all your trash and everything else back with you when you leave. But it's a way to be closer to nature. You can see some sights, you can have some fun hiking, or just enjoying nature and sounds and lack of the sounds of normal civilization that you're used to hearing. So it's a great way to experience the outdoors, and we love it. And we go back not as often maybe as we would like. If you're traveling in the West, it's a very, very interesting way to spend some time. You do have to think about eventually emptying tanks and taking on more fresh water, but usually you'll find a small town, and sometimes there's a small fee. A lot of places will let you do that for no charge. Just depends on what you can find. And remember, you're highly unlikely to have good cell phone service or good data service out in these parts of the world. There's just not enough population to support the infrastructure which is needed. So you may have to do that research at some point by driving someplace, or when you're on the road, or before you even decide to take the trip. But we hope you've enjoyed this quick look at some boondocking information, and we hope you'll join us as we travel the highways and byways of America. Perhaps we'll see you camped in the desert somewhere.